Greetings and welcome to Conspiracy Corner News special episode. We have as our guest, interviewed with Bob Wilson and I, Bart Sabrell, John Barbour. He is best known as the godfather of reality TV. He's an actor, comedian, television host, and is the only performer in TV to win Emmys for both entertainment and news stories. Barbour is best known as one of the hosts and creators of the NBC reality television series Real People. I remember watching that as a young man, and that being actually one of my favorite shows on television. He also directed and wrote the 1992 documentary, The JFK Assassination, the Jim Garrison tapes, and that's what we'll be talking with him about. And we'd like to start just by putting up a brief trailer about the DVD, and this will be on the screen right now.
Black Hawk Radio presents John Barbour's last word on the Garrison tapes. District Attorney Jim Garrison, portrayed by Kevin Costner in JFK, risked everything in trying to tell the true story of President John F. Kennedy's murder. The only person he did tell everything to about his investigation was John Barbour, creator, co-producer, and co-host of the trend-setting Real People. In this stunning, revealing, thrilling 70-minute film with metaphysical undertones and mind-blowing information is the story of the man who had everything and almost against his will risked it all over a 40-year period trying to tell Mr. Garrison's story.
There's no question about that. That's when it all began, because they got away with it. And Garrison says on camera, he says, John, you know, these people had no qualms about dropping napalm into women and children running around in black pajamas who were yellow and burning them to death. Do you think they have any problem eliminating a solitary 5'9" blue-eyed, red-headed Irish American?
After you see this film, you will never be the same. John Barbour's last word on the Garrison tapes.
All right, I'd like to introduce Bob now, and he can ask our guest the first question of many, I'm sure.
Jim Garrison in World War II was exposed to Dachau, and it influenced him greatly. I was wondering if you could go into a little bit of what Jim saw there and how it affected him and shaped him as a judge.
It was a photograph that he had taken. I had asked him, I interviewed him on September 5th, 1981. And what I want to get to, if you talked about the last word on the assassination, that was really a compilation of material. But what I want to really talk to you about is part 2 of the Garrison tapes, which is called The American Media and the Second Assassination of President John F. Kennedy, which opens 3 days before John Kennedy's 100th birthday. His birthday is May 29th. We open on May the 26th at the Music Hall Theater in Beverly Hills, California. It is the greatest gift that this only peace president could have. Now, you guys both know there'll be a tsunami on his 100th birthday. Every network, every cable station will be running stories about what John Kennedy did. But this is the only documentary which will tell you what Jim Garrison said an element of the CIA and the government did to John Kennedy, and how all of the mainstream media helped protect the known killers. And Garrison says on camera, he said, they had help from the media before Dallas. Otherwise, they would have. It became a no-risk operation with the media helping them, with the Dallas police helping them. Now to this business about Dachau. When I sat down to interview him, he must have had 1,000 books in the bookcase, but he had one photograph. Only one photograph on the wall, and that was him sitting on the edge of a wall on the edge of Dachau prison, and underneath it he had written, "Lest we forget." And that's the kind of man he was. And he said to me, he said, you know, I was an authoritarian. He said, listen, I was in the military. I got involved with the military syndrome. I was FBI. I got used to taking orders. So when the government told us in 1963 that Lee Harvey Oswald did it. I believed him. And then when they published the Warren Report, I believed that too. And like myself, I believed it. This was 1967 when he arrested Clay Shaw, and it was only an accident. And I must tell you guys something, Bart and Bob. All the absolute wonderful, wonderful things that happened to me in my life happened by accident. Getting real people on the air, starting the AM show in Los Angeles, getting to meet Jim Garrison, getting to hear his story, that was all accidental. But all the really terrible things that happened to me were the things that I had planned very, very, very well. So anyway, he had an accidental meeting with Senator Hale Boggs, who was the only dissenting member of the Warren Commission. And Hale Boggs said to him there was just no way that kid, meaning Oswald, could have fired that rifle and killed that man. He said, I'm a hunter, I know guns. That was an old Mantliker Carcano. It could have never, ever done it. Now, as a dissenting member of the Warren Commission, his dissent was never published, and we never heard from him again because, like a lot of people, Paul Wellstone and maybe John Kennedy Jr., who was thinking of running for the Senate in New York City, they disappear in plane crashes. Well, Wayne Boggs disappeared in a plane crash in Alaska. They never found his body, and they never found the plane. But anyway, that's what set Jim Garrison off on the trail of the assassins. And that's the book that he published, and that's the book that Oliver Stone optioned for $50,000 on which to base his movie JFK.
Now, when you just spoke about that, when the plane crash went down, he had also just given quite a diatribe against J. Edgar Hoover.
Yeah, that's right. You're absolutely right. He did. He said the CIA lied to us. The FBI lied to us. He said they all lied to us.
I think he referred to Hoover as a Nazi, I believe, at the time.
Yes, he did, and it was before Congress or the Senate. I mean, he vilified him. It's in the congressional record.
And then his plane went down. No mystery. Look at the plane that E. Howard Hunt's wife was on. She was carrying money to pay off the people that broke into the Watergate Hotel. She was on a commercial airliner that went down in Chicago. And as soon as it hit the ground, the FBI surrounded the plane so nobody got in there to either rescue or investigate. It was all shut down. Yeah, I'd heard that the firemen were on the way before it crashed, and the other part which you alluded to, the agents were there, like lickety-split, you could say.
But this documentary that we have just done is something that I had not planned on doing. When you mentioned the last word on the assassination 3 years ago was the 50th anniversary, and there was nothing at all on any of the networks possibly questioning the Warren Commission. Now, you all remember that the House Select Committee concluded 4 shots had been fired in Dealey Plaza, okay? 4 shots had been fired, therefore a conspiracy existed in the murder of John Kennedy. They also found that conspiracy consisted in the murder of Martin Luther King, and this was proven in a court because the King family, with William Pepper as their attorney, sued the federal government and the FBI for complicity and conspiracy in the murder of Martin Luther King, and they won the case. And it was never, ever reported. Okay, so there you go.
Well, if I may chime in, what always astounded me about that is we have the U.S. Select Committee on Assassination, I think 1975 or something like that. They proved that there were 4 shots, like you said. They proved that, which means Oswald either didn't do it or had help doing it, which means an assassin of the President of the United States is at large. So why isn't he on the #1 FBI most wanted list, right?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned this business of a most wanted list, because the documentary I have just done, and I've seen a number of documentaries, were excellent. This is the only documentary that has a sort of an uplifting ending, because we take the facts and you're going to be absolutely be stunned by the fact, as much as you think you know about the document, about the murder of John Kennedy, you are going to be absolutely staggered by what you will see in this film, which opens at the Music Hall Theater in Beverly Hills, May 26th and June 9th in New York City at Cinema Village. Now, I want to get back to the business of the last word on the assassination. It is when Tom Brokaw is the one that brought me to NBC when I was a film critic at I was a film critic at Did somebody just fall off a chair?
You've got good hearing there. I'm not sure what's going on. Somebody's adjusting.
I don't have good hearing, but you need some WD-40 on that chair you're sitting on.
Yeah, I think that's the deputy director in Langford just relaxing.
Yeah, that's funny. But in any event, Tom Brokaw is the one that brought me to NBC, where I was the first person in America to review movies on television and on television news. Now they're as common as weather people, and so I was very controversial because I was in the heart of Hollywood telling them that they were making absolute garbage. 99 out of 100 movies made in Hollywood are absolutely dreadful, and I would say so, and I would say so in very humorous ways. You mentioned that I was the only person to win. I won 5 Emmys, only person to ever win Emmys for both news and entertainment. But anyway, because no network was offering any other view of the assassination, because Garrison says, and he says it in this movie. I'm going to rewind a bit about the House Select Committee and assassination. Do you know who the first director of the House Select Committee was?
No, I don't.
Nobody knows.
Was it Gerald Ford or no? Who was it? Or
No,
Mondale?
No, nobody knows. No, nobody knows. Stokes is just a hack for the CIA. Absolutely nobody knows because it's never told by the mainstream media. This documentary talks about the birth of fake news, which is with us today. And Jim Garrison ran into this fake news when he was investigating and solved the murder of John F. Kennedy. Solved the murder. There's no doubt about this. So what happened 3 years ago is that I recalled that a couple of years prior to that, Robert Kennedy Jr. was being interviewed by Charlie Rose in Dallas at an opera house. He said, my father, that means Bobby Kennedy, did not believe the conclusions of the Warren Report. Now, that was printed once and disappeared, and Bobby Kennedy Jr. would not let Charlie Rose or anybody else talk about it, even though Bobby Kennedy Jr. Endorses James Douglas' book about the unspeakable. My good friend is a fellow named Dick Russell, who wrote most of Jesse Ventura's best-selling books, and he also works with Bobby Kennedy. So I called Dick, and I said, you know, what I would like to do is I'd like to screen the Garrison tapes at UNLV. And then George Knapp, who is the best host of Coast to Coast, he's the Sunday night host, agreed to interview him for nothing. I took my last $25,000, offered it to his agency, which is the Kessler Speakers Bureau, back there near Arlington, Virginia. He accepted it. And so there were 1,200 people waiting to see an interview between George Knapp and Bobby Kennedy, the screening of the Garrison tapes, and then questions and answers from the audience. The place would have been jammed. 2 days beforehand, he backed out. Now, I had the theater. George Knapp got sick and couldn't do it. The UNLV gave me all the facilities for nothing and said, can you do something, John? So I took the money and I hired Jim Mars, Dick Russell, and Joan Mellon to be panelists in front of the students at UNLV. What we also did is Jim Garrison, using simple detective work, tracked down the guy that ordered Jack Ruby to shoot Lee Harvey Oswald. We had that 5-minute segment in this last word on the assassination. We got absolutely no publicity and no promotion on that, and for 3 years it's been a constant bestseller on Amazon, because I'll tell you, fellas, the two most Googled things in the world are first UFOs and secondly the John F. Kennedy assassination. Now, when I finished the first draft of my documentary on November 21st last year, I screened it in front of 300 people at the Texas Theater in Dallas. Of the 300 people, I'd say 250 had not been born when John Kennedy was murdered, and it got a spontaneous 10-minute standing ovation. I was a film critic for LA Magazine for 10 years, 5 years at KNBC as Tom Snyder's sidekick on the 6 o'clock news. I have seen thousands of movies and never saw a standing ovation. So I'm really curious to see the reaction to people when they go into the theater in Los Angeles or in New York to see this film, because it is monumentally powerful. And as I said, you're going to learn things that you never knew. Now I'll get back to the House Select Committee on Assassinations. The first man appointed was a tough Philadelphia prosecutor named Richard Sprague. He had a staff of 6 people. We found film of him saying this. In this staff of 6 people, he said, we are not hiring any FBI or any CIA to investigate. We are going to investigate these agencies. We will solve this crime. Well, immediately, the CIA went to work, and they got rid of Richard Sprague like they do everybody else. And Garrison says, not only do they assassinate or murder people in this country, if they can't kill them, they assassinate their character. And that's what happened to Richard Sprague. And they replace him with this hack named Robert Blakey, who turns the entire thing over to the Central Intelligence Agency. There is stuff in this document, some people should not see it, because as Jack Nicholson said in A Few Good Men, you can't handle the truth. Some people will be so overwhelmed by what they will learn, they will be blown out of their comfort zones, which is going to make them very uncomfortable. But on the other hand, I'm telling you, there is something at work. There is something at work in the universe or in America where people want the truth about this to finally come out. Because if you look at any newscast today or read any periodical today, you cannot escape the word fake news. This tells you how and why fake news started in America in a project created by the Central Intelligence Agency called Project Mockingbird. Anyway, I don't want to come on here and do an hour monologue, so I'm going to stop now, and you guys can ask me any questions that you wish.
Well, I've got one for you just from what you just said. How taken over is the media today? What kind of budget is coming against it, and who's pulling the strings?
It was this is how smart Garrison was. When he and by the way, when Garrison says that he saw the murder of John Kennedy, he says it in 1967 when he actually arrests Clay Shaw. Because of the movie JFK, there was such an overwhelming response by the public, in spite of the fact that everybody attacked him. The CIA runs the New York Times, the CIA runs Woodward at the Washington Post, and you may recall when word got out that JFK was going to be made by Oliver Stone, they attacked him before he had even shot a frame of film. And they attacked him monumentally. It was going on all the time. They were denigrating him. They called it Dallas in Wonderland. That's how they tried to denigrate him. But anyway, what happened was Garrison investigated also the origins of the Central Intelligence Agency. And he said, why do we need more intelligence agencies, okay? It's in the middle 50s. We've got the naval intelligence, we got the FBI, we got all kinds. Why the CIA? Because they needed to create something that would influence foreign policy. And the only way, because Garrison says there's no reason for a Cold War with the Russians, they lost 25 million people. So that whole thing is fake about the threat of the Soviet Union is entirely fake, because the Depression ended with World War II. Now you have 1.5 million troops coming home. How many refrigerators can they make? How many cars can they make before you have another recession? But you can make a bomb a day. And you might remember before Dwight Eisenhower, who could have done something about it as a popular general, but did nothing. He warned us about the threat of the military-industrial complex. So anyway, what the CIA did, they murdered 3 democratically elected leaders of other countries. They murdered Mossadegh in Iran in '54 because he nationalized British petroleum, setting a bad example, taking over the oil for his people. And there is Eisenhower on camera telling Allen Dulles, go get rid of them. They go get rid of them. The same thing happened to Arbenz in Colombia, and it happened in Guatemala. They murdered all the leaders. It was a project of the CIA's called the Family Jewels. On that target list was John Kennedy, because he refused to allow the Central Intelligence Agency, he refused to give them air support at the Bay of Pigs, and he said, I'm withdrawing the 12,000 advisors from Vietnam. The day after he was killed, Lyndon Johnson sent 50,000 troops. After the furor over the movie JFK and hundreds of thousands of letters going to Congress, Congress was forced to pass the Assassinations Records Act. And as a result of that, there was one document that was either purposely released, maybe by somebody at the CIA, because it was only an element of the CIA that murdered John Kennedy. It wasn't the entire CIA, because they operate on a need-to-know basis. Either that, or it was accidentally released. The document is featured 3 times in the film, proving Jim Garrison was right. The document is dated 1967, immediately after he arrests Clay Shaw. Now he's after Clay Shaw for conspiracy, but his big case was perjury. All you heard about was that he lost the Clay Shaw conspiracy trial, but he got a conviction on perjury. But he was not allowed to bring that trial to court because the federal government stopped that also. But in any event, the memo says we must give legal assistance and assist Clay Shaw, otherwise Mr. Garrison is going to get a conviction of Clay Shaw for conspiracy to murder John F. Kennedy. Why would they do that? Because they knew that Garrison was right. He had solved the case. So now I don't want to do a monologue here, because I could go on forever. I'll tell you simply, it is by far the best, most definitive documentary that will ever be made about this case. It is done in 10 separate chapters, and the chapters start with the CIA and the media before Dallas. Then we go to the facts of what happened during 48 hours in Dallas, and then we go to the fiction of the Warren Report. We go through other chapters, which are the House Select Committee. Then we go through the chapter about Oliver Stone's movie, and then there's a chapter, 78 people, according to the House Select Committee, were murdered or disappeared who were related to the Kennedy assassination, and we give you about a dozen of them. Now, I'll tell you quickly, when Blakey took over, Sam Giancana supposed to testify. 2 days before he's supposed to testify, he's shot in the mouth, he's shot in the back of the head and 6 times around the mouth, dies. Johnny Rosselli, who was one of the planners who met with Larry O'Brien, who was the president of the Democratic Party, Robert Mayhew, at a confab here at the Desert Inn, they were planning the hit on Fidel Castro, okay? Johnny Rosselli supposed to testify. They found his body parts in a barrel in the Caribbean, and then George de Morgenschild, who was the CIA's assigned best friend to Lee Harvey Oswald, is also ready to be interviewed by one of the House Select Committee members. I think it's Gaetan Fonzi. And the day before, his head is blown off supposedly by a rifle in a suicide. And not one newspaper nor Robert Blakey ever uttered one word of doubt about the possibility of that. The other thing that I will tell you, there's a wonderful speech by Mark Lane, who published Rush to Judgment. Now, he was vilified because they said he was trying to make money and all the rest of that. He could not get that book published in the United States. He got it published in England with the help of Bertrand Russell, and he was only paid $1,500. But it became a monumental bestseller because people could read the truth, finally, about the shabbiness of the Warren Commission. And remind me to tell you something important about the Clayshaw trial and the Warren Commission, but this wonderful speech by Mark Lane. He said, John, if this had been a celebrity rape trial or some kind of murder trial involving a celebrity, you would have had the ACLU acting on behalf of the New York Times and the Washington Post and Time Life magazine and Newsweek and all the rest of them, even PBS, coming down on them and saying, this must be open. Give us the facts. Let us hear. This was closed to the public for 9 months. Now, I'm going to tell you, when Garrison arrested Shaw to protect Shaw and his case, Clay Shaw was in the deep, deviant, sadomasochistic, homosexual behavior. We see that in the film, but Garrison would not let anybody talk about that. None of his staff could talk about that. To protect Clay Shaw and his own case, he went to the grand jury who indicted right away. Then, what he did is he went to a 3-judge panel. And we have on camera Clay Shaw's lawyer, a guy named Diamond. Now, he wanted to prove that his client Clay Shaw is innocent. He introduces the 26 volumes. The 3 judges rule the Warren Commission report not admissible in any court of law because it was never an investigation. The Warren report is entire hearsay. Hearsay. Now, if the mainstream media had reported that, it was over for Lyndon Johnson. He would not have been president. He would have been impeached for impeding an investigation into the murder of his predecessor. And John Kennedy was going to get rid of Lyndon Johnson. All of this is documented in the film. Anyway, I stop here, and you guys can ask any questions you wish.
Well, I've only seen the first one so far, but Vietnam plays into it. And I know Diem was murdered on November 2nd, and Kennedy was killed on November 22nd. So we had the leaders of, Vietnam and America taken out within 20 days at a point, well, this war was forming into something bigger and uglier.
What we show you in this documentary is because of John Kennedy saying he's going to blow the CIA into 1,000 pieces, we show the front page article of a writer named Arthur Kroc. And Arthur Kroc on the front page of the New York Times, it's in October, just a month before he's killed, said if there's ever an attempt to overthrow the government of the United States, it will be a coup perpetrated by the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, after the CIA murdered him, and all the media, CBS, NBC, ABC, all of them, had already been infiltrated by Project Mockingbird. We show you the names of the people who accepted the Central Intelligence Agency taking over their stories about foreign policy. Also, the Church Committee in the middle 70s discovered that the CIA had 400 assets being paid by the mainstream media to write our news. And it is going on to this day.
How much worse is it today?
It's much worse because there is no hope, because there is nobody like Jim Garrison. I'm going to tell you what we did. And one of the wonderful things that I like about my own film, aside from the fact it's the most compelling the fastest 2 hours of film I have ever seen in my life. And I've seen thousands of movies, as I said, as a film critic, and there are 2 or 3 who had brilliant openings. Of course, Clint Eastwood's Hereafter, which opened with the tsunami, was just unbelievable. Philadelphia Story with Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn, not a word is spoken, and it's brilliantly hilarious. And of course, Citizen Kane, Orson Welles movie. The best 10-minute opening of any movie I have ever seen is the opening 10 minutes of this particular documentary. I forgot where I was going to go, but I'm just going to...
I think I was asking how much the media today, we had spoken about this once before privately, how much of a budget do they have, I don't know if many people know this, to put into the media and pay talking heads and biased stories?
Well, let me, if I may interject and answer that
Sure.
one. From my experience in journalism as well as an investigative journalist for a similar story, as you may recall, it was announced not too long ago, the Defense Department misplaced, has no accounting records of $1 trillion over a 10-year period. Now, we also know that...
I'm sorry, Bart. Don't forget Rumsfeld, just before 9/11, said, hey, they've lost $3 trillion. At the Pentagon, they can't account for $3 trillion, and Building 7 was where they held the files to investigate it, and it all went up in smoke.
Well, an aircraft carrier, for example, today is cost up to $12 billion, but that's more than Facebook, Google, and then so with all of these budgets, since Mockingbird, what they have done is they have bought the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, CBS, ABC, NBC, CNN. CNN was sold only for $1 billion, right? So that's only 1/1000th of their budget that's not accounted for. So the CIA has bought all of the media. For example,
for 1/10 of a battleship.
Exactly. And so when you go on to Yahoo, and it's like if you want their free services, you check a little box that says you give the owners of Yahoo the right to scan your emails, which is another word for read. So not only do they physically own the hard drives, which in their mind gives them the legal right to audit what's on the hard drives, which is to read your emails, they have another backup that you gave them permission to do so. See, that way they don't need warrants to study your phone calls or emails because they own AT&T, they own Facebook, they own Google. That's what they've been doing with this money. I mean, that's what's going on. That's how there's no hope. Now, we know that during the 60s, and even when they did anniversary specials, all of the major networks said, here is the answer to who shot JFK. Oswald. Well, that is proof right there that they are owned by the CIA. That's it right there.
Well, let me tell you just an interesting story. I showed the film to a lady that I was thinking about hiring to do publicity because she had been a bright anchor woman, the #1 anchor woman in Reno, and she has a master's in journalism. So I screened the documentary for her. I sat about 20 feet behind her, and every once in a while she went, ooh, huh, ooh, like that. So when the documentary was over, I said to her, Emily, there was no blood and guts. That wasn't the Zapruder film or the autopsy. Of course, there was no autopsy. Why were you oohing and awing? And she said, John, I did not know that in 1963, a company in America could only own 5 television stations or 5 radio stations or 5 newspapers. I had never heard of the fairness doctrine. I had never heard of the equal time clause. And she said, I think I'm an expert on journalism, and you're telling me that I'm misinformed. But right now, because of Bill Clinton signing the Communications Act in 1996, by far the worst president in the history of the United States, cataloged in the film, Bill Clinton, has signed the Communications Act, and now 96% of all our media is owned by 6 corporations. They're going to close down the internet, and it has already started. I'm going to tell you how it has started. There are there are literally, or have been, maybe 1,000 people around the world, from 16-year-old kids to older people, who have sites that are seen by hundreds of thousands of people. And as a result of being seen by them, Coca-Cola and Chrysler and Ford and all these people contact them, want to put up their ads, right? Well, about 2 weeks ago, up pops this site that is very anti-ethnic, and it's really, really weird. But on this site are also all these ads from these major corporations. Some guy publishes a story about how can these companies advertise on this horrible site. And guess what? All of these companies pulled all of their ads from these thousands of people who now have to get a job because they can't run their shows any longer on the internet because they're not getting advertising support. That is how they're destroying the internet. That is a brilliant move by whoever did this.
Well, I can tell you something. Here, John, every time I do a video that has the word CIA in the title, it's immediately demonetized.
Are you kidding?
No, every time.
Oh my gosh almighty.
That's
Oh my gosh.
pretty good, isn't it?
Oh my gosh, that's so interesting.
Well, yeah,
But
the
it was-
deregulation actually started with Reagan. One of the very first things he did, the first week in office, was it went from like you could own 3 television stations to like 30. Then it was Clinton after that, and now it's Trump. Trump is about to sign virtually, there's no limit to how many you can own. And all of these evil people, whoever you think, run the world, whether it's the Bilderbergs, the Illuminati, devil worshippers, whatever you want to call them, what they like to do, and I'm sure you could agree with this, is they like to make their crimes legal. They try to write these laws to make murder legal, to make all this rule-breaking legal. Somehow in their mind, I guess so they can live with themselves, that's how they justify it.
Well, I worked with a number of people who were mega millionaires. I'll tell you something, Bart. You can have enough to eat. You can fill yourself with food. You can have enough sex. But the one bottomless vice is greed. There is no bottom to people's greed. And it's not money that they want. It's not money that the Trumps want. They have enough. They want power. Power is their orgasm. Okay? And it's that simple. I could tell you so many fabulous stories about what is in this movie. I can't wait for the both of you to see this film.
Could I
But,
ask-
oh yeah, what I was going to say, in 1981 when I interviewed him, he leans in the camera and he says, "John, I can tell you there are people walking around today should be arrested and tried for the murder of John Kennedy. There are people around today, Bart and Bob, who should be arrested or questioned. Now, what we have done, this is an open, cold case with the Justice Department. To this day, it's a cold case. So what we have done, toward the end of the film, we have put together a 10 most wanted poster of Americans still alive today, with the 4 most prominent at the top. And at the end of the film, I deliver this wanted poster to the Justice Department, urging them to do their job. Now, we open the film with a great picture of John Kennedy talking about how important the free press is. And at the very end of the movie, there is a picture of John Kennedy, and he says, "Those who do not allow peaceful revolution invite inevitable violent revolution." And there's enough information out there and enough facts to bring hundreds of people to trial for conspiracy in the murder of John Kennedy. But there is no one in office anymore to do that. There are no more Jim Garrisons. He was the last. And look at, who knows what happened, why Comey was really fired. Who knows why these people are dismissed from their jobs. And this business of Russian hacking is absolute and total nonsense. Hillary was hacked by her own people because they hated Hillary.
Well, it's interesting. Bill Clinton's FBI director was fired the day before Vince Foster came up dead. That was just something that came by my purview today. I thought it was kind of pertinent with what was going on now. But when Vince Foster was found dead, the FBI director was fired the day before and moved out. So it was interesting timing just in another case. But I'd like to ask you one about the 32 shots when you were interviewing Jim Garrison, and how many shots were fired from the nose?
Oh, that's a great question, because this is how I lost my job at Real People. When Real People became a #1 show, and I only got it on the air quite by accident, which I don't want to go into too much because I want to answer your question. When somebody owns a show in Hollywood, then and it's a hit, then the networks run to them, the owners, and say, do another show. Even though I created Real People and was the one writing all of the stories that made it a hit, they go to George Slaughter and they want to do, remember the movie Network, Patty Chayefsky's Network?
Yes.
Peter Finch, I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore. Well, Freddie Silverman wanted George Slaughter to do a show like that, a news show like that was sort of that crazy. They hired Marjo Gortner, who had one time been a famous child evangelist who was perfect for the show, and a beautiful black girl. Then Herb Brooks, who was the coach of the U.S. Olympic winning hockey team, okay? Anyway, it was a dreadful, dreadful, dreadful show. George Slaughter was incapable of doing any show on his own. Laugh-In was as much or more Digby Wolf's than it was George Slaughter's, and Real People was all mine, except the fact that he owned it. Anyway, he came to me and asked me if I would do a story, and I said, no, I can't. I'm working 20 hours a day trying to do this hour every week. Anyway, accidentally, I opened the LA Times one day and read that the House Select Committee concluded 4 shots had been fired. I had been fired from my morning show years earlier. I had been fired 11 years earlier and from the AM show because I tried to book Jim Garrison after he lost the Clay Shaw trial when I read Heritage of Stone, which is a recounting of the Clay Shaw trial, where I learned about the 26 volumes being hearsay. I was fired and he was canceled. I had the #1 show in LA and I was fired from it. The same way Phil Donahue was fired after once questioning George Bush about Iraq. And yet you hear Noam Chomsky criticizing this government all the time about their foreign affairs and manages to keep his job. We reveal how connected to the secret deep state Noam Chomsky is, for all of you who think he's the leading intellectual in America. Anyway, I called Jim and asked him if he feels vindicated. He said, John, I feel like a blind man who's gotten a small trophy in a dark room. Only I know I got it. So I said, I'm coming there to tell the story. So when I'm interviewing him, Bob, I say, how many shooters were there, Mr. Garrison? He said, John, it was triangulation. That's a military term. There were 2 teams in the front in the grassy knoll, one behind probably the Daltex building, not the book depository. That had nothing to do with it. 3 teams of 2 men, maybe 3 because they needed radios. Then he said on a need-to-know basis, all the way up to the CIA, he said about 30. So anyway, I interviewed him for 3.5 hours. I had so much material. The first episode, which is 8 minutes, he opens up by saying Lee Harvey Oswald had nothing to do with the assassination. Paraffin test proved he never fired a rifle. The audience was spellbound. At the end of the 8 minutes of listening to Garrison, they cheered. Some even stood up. Now, in the second part, the ratings were just like zipped up there, right? The day before the airing, George Slaughter took my producer, Donna Canner, we show it all on the film, took her into an editing room and re-edited my story with orders not to call me. So the next night when it's airing, and Marjo Gortner leans forward and said, Mr. Garrison, how many shooters were there at Dealey Plaza? George Slaughter has Mr. Garrison saying about 30. And then the phone rings. and it's George Slaughter. And he said, what do you think? Garrison's a nut. Well, I started screaming at him. How could he do this? How could he do this? He was the nut. How could he possibly do that to that man? And he says Garrison deserved it. Well, in those days, used to have answering machines. Being a celebrity, I never answered my phone. My answering machine was always on, so I accidentally recorded Slaughter. I called Garrison, and I was literally crying. First time I'd ever sobbed like that in my life, apologizing and asking him to sue NBC and George Slaughter, that he would own them. He said, John, calm down. Calm down, please. We love your show. You understand that? He said, if I went into a courtroom for every time I was maligned by CBS or NBC or these people, he said, I'd never see my family. I would never get in a courtroom to do my job. Just send me some Real People t-shirts. The next day I confronted Slaughter. We almost had a fist fight. And then, of course, Real People was lost because I left. And it was over with. It was absolutely over with. So, in any event, all of this and much, much more names are mentioned. And when I'm talking about the Walter Cronkites of the world and Mike Wallace's of the world and the Dan Rathers of the world, I don't tell you that they're liars. They prove on camera that they're liars. And going to the film, when we saw it in Dallas, it was like going to a Black Bible, a Baptist revival meeting on Crenshaw Boulevard in Los Angeles, because people were applauding the screen and they were booing the villains. It was one of the great theatrical experiences I've ever had in the 10 years that I was a movie critic.
In February of 1962, President John F. Kennedy said, "We seek a free flow of information. A nation that is afraid to let the people judge the truth or falsehood in an open market is a nation afraid of its people."
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Without knowing precisely who they were, I think there had to be assurance that there would be, at least at the outset, a few elements of the media that would be cooperative from the beginning, because they had to start off with a certain momentum from the beginning before reality started to interfere with the building of the illusion.
Hit the president's head. His head could be seen to move violently forward. His head could be seen to move violently forward.
Most recent, most spectacular development in the Oswald case involves the CIA. It involves, too, the spectacular district attorney of New Orleans, a man they call the Jolly Green Giant.
There's no question as a result of our investigation that an element of the Central Intelligence Agency of our country killed John Kennedy, and that the present administration is concealing the facts. There is no question about it at all.
Did Lee Harvey Oswald shoot President Kennedy? CBS News concludes that he did.
Is he serious?
You know Oswald did it. He did it.
American media will continue to support whatever lie the government continues to regard in favor.
On November 22nd, 1963, not only did John Kennedy die, as we have seen and continue to experience, so did our hopes for world peace. The worst loss, though, the loss that could have corrected our foreign policy carnage, something that John Kennedy and millions of others like him fought for in World War II. November 22nd, 1963, is also the day America's free press died. They became proven aiders, abettors, and protectors of the known murderers of President John F. Kennedy. Learn why, when, and how our media became corrupted in the most important American movie since JFK, The American Media and the Second Assassination of President John F. Kennedy, a movie you will never forget.
And go ahead, Bob, with your next question.
Well, we alluded to it earlier, but when Oswald's handler, George DeMorch, supposedly committed suicide, you had said Gaten Fonzie was going to interview him. And when Mark Lane was listening to this before a board to decide if it was a suicide or if it was a murder. They said they played a tape that was made in the house, and they heard the house alarm go off, and then they heard the gunshots. So it sounded like someone had broken into the house. And then when the shotgun went off, and this had been heard by the, at the inquest, someone spoke up and said, the house alarm went off. And she was told, not to speak. And Bill O'Reilly had placed himself at the front door of the house where this occurred. And he said he didn't see anyone leave the house, meaning it's a suicide, and et cetera, et cetera. So he was the ear witness, that an eyewitness, no one left the house. Then we find out that Gaten Fonzie's wife has a tape, and Bill is speaking to her. Gaten, she holds the tape now. Gaten passed away. And on this tape, it's saying, Bill is asking, what happened? What happened down there? So he wasn't at the house, and he's basically giving testimony that's changing possibly a murder into a suicide. And I don't know how anyone, even in this climate, some of the news anchors have gotten in trouble for trying to make themselves look tough in war. Basically, Bill O'Reilly lied. He wasn't on the front stoop, and he didn't hear anything. And if there was a murder in the house, he's putting himself there as a witness, making this case look like nothing. After that, I think his career should have ended at that moment. I don't know how he wrote another book or did another telecast. And I was wondering what you thought of Bill O'Reilly.
Well, we have a chapter in the book, as I said, the carrot and the stick. Those carrots those are the people who are rewarded for going along, and the stick is for those people who were either killed or lost their careers because of it. And Bill O'Reilly is prominently featured because when he was doing first edition, he was all for appeared to be storming the bunkums of barricade, the barricades of Bunkum put up by the bureaucrats. He had an article, he did a stand-up about outside of the CIA showing a document that proved that there were 9 members of the Central Intelligence Agency assigned to infiltrate Jim Garrison's office. But all of that changed. All of this stuff, and there are scores of them like that, absolutely scores of them. But Jim Garrison always said, it doesn't matter who pulled the trigger, it's who planned it. And we show you who planned it and why they planned it. We also show you who protected them and is still protecting them.
Let me interject here with the question, if that's okay, because we'll be wrapping up soon. What do you think all of this represents, John? Are you a believer in a spiritual battle between good and evil? Do you think this reflects that? Why do such deplorable things happen, and why is a lie so prevalent over truth?
Well, let me put it this way. Evil is much more powerful than love, no matter what anybody said. It indeed is. You can have a very, very healthy human being, and you can inject one cancer cell in that human being, and in 3 months that human being is dead. If you have a human being that has a bunch of cancer cells in him, and you inject a healthy cell, that person is indeed dead. When I was a young man or boy, when living in Toronto, living in Canada, and going to see Frank Capra movies and great movies about America and Jimmy Stewart, I was always surprised if somebody was evil. But now that I'm older in America, I am surprised when they're good. And I don't see, I must tell you, I'm not religious at all. You ask me about the universe, there's nobody can comprehend why an acorn grows into an oak tree, so they cannot comprehend the force that created it. They just invent it. Mankind has invented gods because they're insecure. Now, thousands of years ago, there were bunches of gods. There was a god for fire, a god for land, a god for corn, there was a god for the sky, a god for the clouds, a god for the sun. But as man grew to learn a little bit more about the universe he was living in, then somebody like Moses said, hey, let's reduce it to one God, okay? They invent, and they say, we're made in God's image. No, God is made in our image, because most people cannot handle the reality of having a free mind, having an open mind. Okay, but I must tell you quite honestly, this movie is somehow metaphysically blessed. And I could tell you story after story about how this film is blessed. But I don't want to get off into that spiritual thing. I just like to deal with facts. But I have been a witness to it in making this film. Every bad thing that happened to us, and a lot of it happened, we went one step backwards and then two steps forward. And guess what? It so happens that this film gets to open in Los Angeles, May the 26th, 3 days before John Kennedy's 100th birthday, when everyone in the media will be focusing on John Kennedy, and we're the only ones focusing on the truth about America. And it's the greatest gift to our only peace president. Now, we could have never planned that in a million years. And if I could rename my production company from John Barbour Productions, I would call it Serendipity Productions, because so many things came out of the woodwork to chip in to help us. When we started a GoFundMe account, we had 52 people who chipped in. They had no idea what they were chipping into, just they like you, they loved the first Garrison tapes, were curious about what I might do with part 2. All of their names are in the end of the film. We credit everybody who helped us. So I can't wait for the both of you to see this and be totally stunned and impressed and moved by it. And not only that, there are some very, very huge laughs. You very smartly played what you played at the beginning of this segment part. You played trailer number 2. When Dan Rather says his head moves forward, the audience is booing and hissing. And when you heard that whistle sound, that was George Carlin on camera giving Dan Rather the finger, which got a cheer. There, you'll be stunned at how many huge laughs are in this, and many of the laughs are at these people who are caught with these bald-faced lies about the murder of John Kennedy.
Well, I think when you hear all of the gasps and I guess astonishment, I think it's because we live in a world that's so filled with lies. When people see and hear the truth, it really shocks them and astonishes them, kind of wakes them up. It's like throwing a glass of cold water in their face.
There's an ancient proverb. It's 10,000 years old, Persian proverb. Before George Bush and his war criminal cronies destroyed that ancient culture. It was a 10,000-year-old culture, but there's this ancient proverb, Persian proverb, that says if you're going to tell the truth, you better have one foot in the stirrup. Well, that is that. You know, you better be ready to run because they like to kill the messenger. But I am not in this to tell the truth, okay? I am not a conspiracy theorist, okay? I am a storyteller, because when I was a kid, and I came from a severely dysfunctional family before it was popular, my father ran off to the World War II to join the Canadian Army to the peace and quiet of World War II to get away from our house. I never saw my mother sober, and when she came home, it was always with another uncle who beat the crap out of her, and I was always running to the cops, okay? So I had no life. My life was stories, so I haunted the libraries. And as a kid, I read O. Henry and Guy de Maupassant. I used to listen to the radio and the great storytellers. And I was reading to the class when I was 7 years old because I could read. Nobody else could read, but I could read. What I did with Jim Garrison, people say you're so devoted to this, you're so passionate about telling the truth. That is the farthest thing from the truth. All I'm doing is being selfish, because being a storyteller, there is no better story in America than the story of what this government did to Jim Garrison. And Jim Garrison is a Frank Capra movie in reverse. In other words, Jimmy Stewart does not win at the end, which is totally heartbreaking. But his truth did not die. It's like the movie Viva Zapata. At the end, they sabotage Zapata, they betray Zapata and they murder him. They must have put 120 bullets in him. Now you got a movie that's got a guy bleeding to death, which is Marlon Brando, okay, in this front of this hacienda. But they end in the movie, the Elia Kazan ends the movie by having the truth of what Zapata is fighting for, riding up in the hills. It's the riderless white horse that was his. Well, the white horse for Jim Garrison was his riding on the trail of the assassins. His truth rides with the Garrison tapes. Now, the Garrison tapes was offered to every network free. It was offered to even the assassination sites, which are proven to be infiltrated because they hold their meetings in Dallas and Pittsburgh and New Orleans. They should be at the Justice Department every November 22nd. That should be America's Bastille Day. I don't care if you start out with 5 people this year, but in a few years you'll have 10 and 20,000 people meeting in front of the Justice Department. Now, Donald Trump, because Congress said this year, the law states that these files of the CIA's must be opened. They must be released to the public. Donald Trump is the only one who can release them and the only one who can stop them. So this film becomes really, really timely because whether he releases them, which is doubtful, or doesn't release them, which is also doubtful, we don't know, because the guy's just ad-libbing his presidency. He has no idea on how to be a president, okay? This movie is so topical, the subject will never die, and I have a feeling, before Real People got on the air, I said I'm going to change the face of American television with what I call the entertainment of reality. I've never had that feeling about anything until this documentary film, which opens May 26th. Oh, and now I'm going to tell you something. Pacifica Radio, that's where I first heard Mae Brussel. Have you guys heard of Mae Brussel?
Yes.
Brilliant, brilliant lady. She believed the Warren Report until she saw Lee Harvey Oswald shot by Jack Ruby. She's the granddaughter of the founder of I. Magnin, lived in Beverly Hills. She was a mother of 3 or 4. Then she became, next to Mark Lane, by far the best researcher in the entire country, and she's in the film. Anyway, I forgot where I was going to go about.
But between the last film and this film, like, what's different in the way you're releasing it? What problems did you have with the first one that you encountered that maybe you've changed in the release of this one?
Oh, that's a great question. The first one, people at the Academy told me I was a runaway nominee for Academy Award with the Garrison tapes, but I had a partner named Freddie Weintraub who discovered Bruce Lee and who brought Woodstock to Warner Brothers. And I made him my partner because I didn't know how to handle what would be a big movie. It was going to ride the coattails of JFK, so it should have been huge. And Freddie said, John, you've got the political Woodstock. He sold it to Cinemax without telling me. Once it was sold to Cinemax, it was then ineligible to be nominated for Academy Award. Academy members who knew that I was working on this said, don't do that. Open it for 1 week in Los Angeles, open it for 1 week in New York City, and you will be eligible for a consideration for Academy Award. Now, Bob, whether or not that happens, I don't care. But at least it has a chance at it. And now that it's legitimately in a theater, which never happened to the first one, who knows what could happen? Who knows? I mean, you never know. Maybe Bob Weinstein of the Weinstein Brothers, who are really great producers, maybe he'll walk into the Music Hall Theater and be blown away by this film and say, hey, John, I would like to release it around the world as a movie. But look at this. In the middle of June, I can put it on iTunes, I can put it on Vimeo, and folks would be able to download it for $4 or $5, then it's out there. But imagine, if it's on these sites, millions of people around the world have access to it. I got a letter from a guy 3 days ago coming from Sweden to New York just to see the film.
Well, we wish you the best, John, and we're about to wrap up. Did you have any concluding remarks or questions, Bob?
I just want to remind us where people can go to see the films, where the upcoming showings are, and where it's available.
Oh, thank you very, very much. Oh, by the way, KPFK, which is Pacifica Radio, that's where Mae Brussel got started. For 2 weeks, they have a fundraising campaign on Pacifica Radio in Los Angeles. They're making tickets to this theater and a special edition DVD, because there will be no DVDs. Anybody in Los Angeles listening to KPFK who contributes $100 will get a ticket to a private screening the day before, which is Thursday, 7 o'clock, May the 25th. And after that, there will be a Q&A from that particular audience. That is a monument. I'm so monumentally grateful to them, because in their offices, they say that this is the station that broadcasts to the 99%. And this movie is made for the 99%, taking on the 1%.
Well, thank you,
You did a
John, for being
wonderful
with
job
us.
with part one, and I can't wait to see this.
Well, you're in New York, and you better show up. I'm going to be there from Friday until Monday. I'm going to do a Q&A after the 4:30 screening on Friday, and then after the 6:30 screening on Saturday and Sunday. So you be there and you introduce yourself.
As long as there's a ticket for me to get in, because I think it's going to be crowded, I will be there.
I certainly will have a ticket for you, believe me. And it will be crowded because there are 250 seats in L.A., but there are only 62 at Cinema Village in New York City.
I'll get there early.
Okay, terrific. Bob, thank you very much for having me on the show. Bart, thanks. It was an absolute delight meeting you, and you produced the show beautifully, and thank you again for having me.
Greetings and welcome to Conspiracy Corner News special episode. We have as our guest, interviewed with Bob Wilson and I, Bart Sabrell, John Barbour. He is best known as the godfather of reality TV. He's an actor, comedian, television host, and is the only performer in TV to win Emmys for both entertainment and news stories. Barbour is best known as one of the hosts and creators of the NBC reality television series Real People. I remember watching that as a young man, and that being actually one of my favorite shows on television. He also directed and wrote the 1992 documentary, The JFK Assassination, the Jim Garrison tapes, and that's what we'll be talking with him about. And we'd like to start just by putting up a brief trailer about the DVD, and this will be on the screen right now.
Black Hawk Radio presents John Barbour's Last Word on the Garrison tapes. District Attorney Jim Garrison, portrayed by Kevin Costner in JFK, risked everything in trying to tell the true story of President John F. Kennedy's murder. The only person he did tell everything to about his investigation was John Barbour, creator, co-producer, and co-host of the trend-setting Real People. In this stunning, revealing, thrilling 70-minute film with metaphysical undertones and mind-blowing information is the story of the man who had everything and almost against his will risked it all over a 40-year period trying to tell Mr. Garrison's story.
There's no question about that. That's when it all began, because they got away with it. And Garrison says on camera, he says, John, you know, these people had no qualms about dropping napalm into women and children running around in black pajamas who were yellow and burning them to death. Do you think they have any problem eliminating a solitary 5'9", blue-eyed, red-headed Irish-American?
Only one photograph on the wall, and that was him sitting on the edge of a wall on the edge of Dachau prison, and underneath it he had written, "Lest we forget." And that's the kind of man he was. And he said to me, he said, you know, I was an authoritarian. He said, listen, I was in the military. I got involved with the military syndrome. I was FBI. I got used to taking orders. So when the government told us in 1963 that Lee Harvey Oswald did it, I believed him. And then when they published the Warren Report, I believed that too. And like myself, I believed it. This was 1967 when he arrested Clay Shaw, and it was only an accident. And I must tell you guys something, Bart and Bob. All the absolute wonderful, wonderful things that happened to me in my life happened by accident. Getting real people on the air, starting the AM show in Los Angeles, getting to meet Jim Garrison, getting to hear his story. That was all accidental. But all the really terrible things that happened to me were the things that I had planned very, very, very well. So anyway, he had an accidental meeting with Senator Hale Boggs, who was the only dissenting member of the Warren Commission. And Hale Boggs said to him there was just no way that that kid, meaning Oswald, could have fired that rifle and killed that man. He said, I'm a hunter, I know guns. That was an old Mantliker Carcano. It could have never, ever done it. Now, as a dissenting member of the Warren Commission, his dissent was never published, and we never heard from him again because, like a lot of people, Paul Wellstone and maybe John Kennedy Jr., who is thinking of running for the Senate in New York City, they disappear in plane crashes. Well, Wayne Boggs disappeared in a plane crash in Alaska. They never found his body, and they never found the plane. But anyway, that's what set Jim Garrison off on the trail of the assassins. And that's the book that he published, and that's the book that Oliver supported. Okay, so there you go.
Well, if I may chime in, what always astounded me about that is we have the U.S. Select Committee on Assassination, I think 1975 or something like that. They proved that there were 4 shots, like you said. They proved that, which means Oswald either didn't do it or had help doing it, which means an assassin of the President of the United States is at large. So why isn't he on the #1 FBI most wanted list, right?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned this business of a most wanted list, because the documentary I have just done, and I've seen a number of documentaries, were excellent. This is the only documentary that has a sort of an uplifting ending, because we take the facts, and you're going to be absolutely be stunned by the fact. As much as you think you know about the document, about the murder of John Kennedy, you are going to be absolutely staggered by what you will see in this film, which opens at the Music Hall Theater in Beverly Hills, May 26th and June 9th in New York City at Cinema Village. Now, I want to get back to the business of the last word on the assassination. It is when Tom Brokaw is the one that brought me to NBC when I was a film critic at Did somebody just fall off a chair?
You've got good hearing there. I'm not sure what's going on. Somebody's adjusting.
I don't have good hearing, but you need some WD-40 on that chair you're sitting on.
Yeah, I think that's the deputy director in Langford just relaxing.
Yeah, that's funny. But in any event, Tom Brokaw is the one that brought me to NBC, where I was the first person in America to review movies on television and on television news. Now they're as common as weather people, and so I was very controversial because I was in the heart of Hollywood telling them that they were making absolute garbage. 99 out of 100 movies made in Hollywood are absolutely dreadful, and I would say an option for $50,000 on which to base his movie JFK.
Now, when you just spoke about that, when the plane crash went down, he had also just given quite a diatribe against J. Edgar Hoover.
Yeah, that's right. You're absolutely right. He did. He said the CIA lied to us. The FBI lied to us. He said they all lied to us.
I think he referred to Hoover as a Nazi, I believe, at the time.
Yes, he did, and it was before Congress or the Senate. I mean, he vilified him. It's in the congressional record.
And then his plane went down.
Then his plane went down. No mystery. Look at the plane that E. Howard Hunt's wife was on. She was carrying money to pay off the people that broke into the Watergate Hotel. She was on a commercial airliner that went down in Chicago. And as soon as it hit the ground, the FBI surrounded the plane, so nobody got in there to either rescue or investigate. It was all shut down.
Yeah, I'd heard that the firemen were on the way before it crashed, and the other part which you alluded to, the agents were there, like lickety split, you could say.
But this documentary that we have just done is something that I had not planned on doing. When you mentioned the last word on the assassination 3 years ago was the 50th anniversary, and there was nothing at all on any of the networks possibly questioning the Warren Commission. Now, you all remember that the House Select Committee concluded 4 shots had been fired in Dealey Plaza, okay? 4 shots had been fired, therefore a conspiracy existed in the murder of John Kennedy. They also found that conspiracy consisted in the murder of Martin Luther King, and this was proven in a court because the King family, with William Pepper as their attorney, sued the federal government and the FBI for complicity and conspiracy in the murder of Martin Luther King, and they won the case. And it was never, ever repeated.
After you see this film, you will never be the same. John Barbour's last word on the Garrison tapes.
All right, I'd like to introduce Bob now, and he can ask our guest the first question of many, I'm sure.
Jim Garrison in World War II was exposed to Dachau, and it influenced him greatly. I was wondering if you could go into a little bit of what Jim saw there and how it affected him and shaped him as a judge.
It was a photograph that he had taken. I interviewed him on September 5th, 1981. And what I want to get to, if you talked about the last word on the assassination, that was really a compilation of material. But what I want to really talk to you about is part 2 of the Garrison tapes, which is called The American Media and the Second Assassination of President John F. Kennedy, which opens 3 days before John Kennedy's 100th birthday. His birthday is May 29th. We open on May the 26th at the Music Hall Theater in Beverly Hills, California. It is the greatest gift that this only peace president could have. Now, you guys both know there'll be a tsunami on his 100th birthday. Every network, every cable station will be running stories about what John Kennedy did. But this is the only documentary which will tell you what Jim Garrison said an element of the CIA and the government did to John Kennedy, and how all of the mainstream media helped protect the known killers. And Garrison says on camera, he said they had help from the media before Dallas. Otherwise, they would have. It became a no-risk operation with the media helping them, with the Dallas police helping them. Now to this business about Dachau. When I sat down to interview him, he must have had 1,000 books in the bookcase, but he had one photograph